Hello. Welcome again to the rantings and ravings of a college student talking about excerpts. Today we're going to talk about the excerpt from The Creation. This is one of three excerpts, but when we're talking about the excerpt to play on an audition, we're referring to number 26 in its entirety. It's like a minute and a half long. It's an excerpt, but it's an entire section of the piece. Mainly because the bass drum continues to keep running throughout the entire song. Doesn't really ever seem to stop. On to Haydn. Franz Joseph Haydn was born on March 31st, 1732, and he died on May 31st, 1809. Haydn was an Austrian composer during the classical period. We dub him the father of the symphony due to his musical contributions to form, his musical form contributions, excuse me. He was also instrumental in creating chamber music, so he was detrimental to having piano trios and string quartets. It's very important man, as we know. He wrote like over 100 symphonies, so father is a bit of an understatement, if I'm being honest. But when we go over to The Creation, understanding what this piece is about. So The Creation is about the creation of the world. It is a piece trying to document through music how the book of Genesis was written. So we have all the different days, and so every process that God went through to make our world is documented within this piece of music. So during our excerpt, it comes after the sixth day. So technically we're taking a rest, and we are overlooking this creation. And it's this great celebration of our creation, of what God has created. This overwhelming joy and relaxation over the hard work. I'm clearly not very religious, so a lot of these things are kind of when we look at the score, when I say score, I really mean part. We're not really going to worry too much about context of other instruments, unless it is regards to whether they and how they would relate back to us. Some we're not necessarily going to worry about like chords, is what I mean. Excuse me. Got COVID? No. So we don't see too many real markings in the part. We see one dynamic marking at the beginning. Forte. We start forte. The idea is like we're going strong. There's some staccato marks, and that's about it. There's staccato marks every now and again, and I think there's one more dynamic, if I'm not mistaken. Nope, I am mistaken. We have one dynamic marking at the beginning, and a few staccato marks here and there. I think others, and then on my part that I'm looking at, I've got some etched in tenutos over these higher notes. So. Before we move on, I'd like to talk quickly about why we have this as part of our repertoire. Like why the bass trombonist sees this on like every audition. This is, in my experience, been on every audition I've taken, and along with Ride of the Valkyries and almost with Schumann. I haven't seen Schumann too much lately since I got out of the college audition scene, but those are like top three. With the Haydn, it is we are trying to demonstrate that we are technically proficient with our instrument, and we also are stylistically proficient. We don't need to play everything so heavy. This entire section of the piece, is really light. It's you're happy. You're not like trying to take over the world. You've just created it. You want to be really happy and bombastic and just ready to go. So the idea is, can you play Can you play this really bouncing lick? These bouncing licks, I mean. And maintain technical proficiency. So it's a challenging piece, but it's not. It's a pretty basic part of our repertoire. The bass trombone is usually always called on in a lot of compositions to be the more technically proficient instrument within the brass family, the low brass family. Excuse me. The trumpets obviously beat us in every other aspect. But like tenor trombones don't get the same parts that we do, and even tubas don't really get the same parts we do. We always get this weird hybrid of both those parts. So this is a demonstration that we can do that really well and on our own. The bass trombonist is the only trombone player that plays during this piece. So it's entirely with you and with the bass trombonist in the choir, and obviously in some parts of the orchestra. Now we kind of got into like a dry bones why we're performing this. Let's kind of understand how we prepare it and how we prepare it. How do we prepare it and how we perform it at an audition or even in a performance. We're mainly going to focus on an audition performance. First thing we gotta keep in mind is this is no way heavy. There's really no reason to play any of these notes super heavy. Of course, I mean by that as in like it's either loud or it's edgy. Like there doesn't. It just seems it'd be stereotypically trombone if we played it the way we might want to. So every part of this is supposed to sound bouncy. That's like if one is preparing this excerpt, the only thing I really want them to be thinking about is bouncing. So we have these licks, and obviously you should play with a metronome, play with a tuner, and just take these things slow, and be sure you can play all this. When we're getting, I find the scariest part of this excerpt is definitely at the end of the third bar, where you do this octave jump to a high G. In practice, that's not too hard, but you generally aren't breathing before it. So you kind of have to have a really good sense of your embouchure and your abilities to do an octave jump after just running for a bit. It's very similar, like running a mile and then being asked to do like pull-ups. Like you need to have the sort of endurance to be able to handle that. And then you gotta keep going. Finding the big thing is to find where you can breathe. So I guess after we've figured out how to play this and how we're going to get through like learning these licks, like slow tempos and lip slurs, making sure you have the range for it. You should one should of course figure out where they want to breathe. But this is entirely up for debate. You can breathe whenever you need to, as I generally tend to do. In the real world, breathing isn't too big of a deal, especially when you're in the back of the orchestra. But there are people who, in audition sense, wait until the first rest to breathe. And I think that's insane, personally, because that's, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 measures of just playing. Or technically it's 12, but... And, I don't know. I only know one person who can do that, and he's a really, really good bass trombonist, and definitely better than everybody else. So, do what you must. Let's see how much time am I at. Okay, cool. Generally, we can talk about interpretation in kind of three ways, but not very much. The idea it doesn't really lend itself to being super versatile. But generally, you want to be bouncy, and how bouncy you want to be is totally up to you. You want a tempo that is happy, so that tempo is also up to date. I frequently change tempos in accordance to how I'm feeling, but we need it would be discussion over like the low notes. I think that was a thing coming to UCLA where I learned that you can have different ideas how to do that when you're doing these leaps that are not diatonic or they're not scalar. Excuse me. They're just they're leaps. How do we play them, especially with these low Fs and these low As and those, like from the low B flat to low F range to low E flat range? How do we play those? Do we play them a bit heavier? Do we play them like bouncy but heavy? Or do we kind of just play them as the same value as every other note? Do we keep everything the same? Personally, I like to make them a little bit heavier to give them a bit more oomph. But not like so heavy that they take over the rest of the music. They're not the same. They're not treated equally, but they're not so different that you gotta break the style. So yeah, things you keep in mind as you're tuning. You're gonna be of course a couple different keys, and you have a bunch of scale runs and a lot of fast little 16th neighbor tones. So keeping up with your time is really important. And playing in tune. And that's really not too much with this excerpt. I will be playing it 3 times as per usual. I'll play it once where every note is the same, and we're going to keep it at a pretty brisk tempo. I'll do another time where it's the same tempo, but the lower notes are going to be a little bit on the heavier bouncy side, as I was discussing earlier. And the third time, I'm going to take it a little bit slower and maintain the heavier bounce as well. do yeah, and happy practicing.